By early 2024, in a reading room above the Paccard Museum and Bell Foundry near Annecy, France, a researcher scrolls through digitized glass plates from the late 19th century. The images are simple: furnaces, moulds, men in aprons. But on one sequence from 1891, the year the foundry cast the massive Savoyard bell for the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur in Paris, something begins to appear. The same bell profile, the same curve of bronze, the same crown, the same proportions, repeats in 3 different contexts. In one photograph, the bell hangs in a church frame, the caption noting only a parish mission. In another, an almost identical bell stands on a factory roof beside a steam whistle. In a third, a bell of matching profile is mounted at the edge of a rocky shoreline, next to a squat tower and a faint horizon of sea. The catalogue numbers are neat, the captions unremarkable, but one card has a blank field where the destination should be, the ink visibly scratched away. Official histories describe these bells as instruments of faith, symbols of identity, and later tools of industry. Lighthouses relied on horns and diaphones. Factories used sirens. Railways trusted whistles and telegraphs. Bells, in this story, are background, romantic, picturesque, but technologically secondary. The images say something quieter. The bells on cliffs are labelled as fog signals. The bells on factory roofs are linked to shift changes and emergency alert. Papers from bell foundries in Britain and France, written in the late 1800s, describe precise control of partial tones, low frequencies engineered to travel across valleys and water. The language is dry, mathematical, yet the effect is almost architectural. History remembers progress, but forgets what it replaced. On the last plate, the Savoyard appears again, now in Montmartre, its note designed to roll over the city like distant thunder. The screen flickers. The bell's dark surface seems to absorb the light. In 1858, in the Whitechapel district of London, molten bronze was poured into an enormous mould. The result, first rung publicly the following year, would become one of the most famous bells in the world, the Great Hour Bell of the Palace of Westminster, known to most as Big Ben. Official histories frame it as a symbol of parliamentary democracy, Victorian engineering, national timekeeping. Newspapers of the period described the new clock as proof that Britain could synchronise an empire. The bell's role appeared simple on paper: mark the hours, reassure the city, and broadcast precision time to a capital wired by telegraph. The artifact remains tangible. In photographs from the 1890s, the Whitechapel Bell Foundry shows patterns, gauges, and templates used to shape the bell's characteristic profile. Inside the foundry, tuning forks line the benches. Outside, the bell's template hung above the door. Later, accounts note that the bell was recast after the first attempt failed, and that even the final version cracked under a hammer that was too heavy. The bell was then slightly reshaped and retuned, giving it its distinctive, uneven but recognizable tone. Human traces remain in ledgers and photographs, workers standing alongside the bell, dwarfed by its mass, their names mostly unrecorded. Visitors to the foundry before its closure in 2017 remarked on how loud even a smaller demonstration bell was when swung in the courtyard. On paper, nothing here appears anomalous. Dates line up. Cast in 1858, first rung in 1859. Retuned soon after. The archival records are consistent. The engineering notes match the physical object. Yet the sound itself carries more than a time signal. Low frequencies spill into the stone of Westminster and across the Thames, a slow, repetitive pulse folding into the city's acoustic fabric. Outside, Cold air carries the chime down river. Inside, the tuning diagrams show ratios and overtones, the deep strike sounds, then the faint after ring, the last vibration hanging over London longer than the clock face admits. By the late 1880s, in Loughborough, England, another bell foundry was quietly rewriting the science behind that sound. John Taylor and Company, a firm cast in church and civic bells since the 14th century, was experimenting with profiles and internal tuning, guided by emerging acoustic theory. Later analysis would credit them, alongside the work of Canon Arthur Simpson, with rediscovering true harmonic tuning in the late 19th century. The artifact here is not just a bell, but a pattern, a cross-section diagram linking thickness at precise heights to specific partials: hum, prime, tierce, quint, nominal. An 1890s engineering report, still cited by modern campanologists, described how removing metal from certain internal zones raises or lowers particular frequencies, allowing tuners to align partials into a consonant chord. In the foundry yard, steam from cooling metal would have mixed with winter air. Inside, the tuning lathe hummed. The bell lay sideways, rotating slowly while a cutting tool shaved the bronze. The sound was controlled violence, a continuous metallic hiss, and then periodically the sharp test strike of a hammer as the tuner listened for changes in the overtone pattern. Human reaction surfaces in later technical commentary. Investigators analysing recordings of historic peals have noted that bells cast and tuned in this era show surprising accuracy in their strike notes, outpacing earlier assumptions about primitive methods. They concluded that 19th century founders were not working blindly, but assessing and adjusting bells with a clear, if partly intuitive, sense of acoustic physics. There is no obvious contradiction in the records, the dates of casting, the names of founders, the adoption of Simpson, tuning in British foundries, follow a coherent timeline, yet the implications reach further than the footnotes admit. Bells are no longer just symbolic. They are engineered sound devices, tuned with mathematical precision to project stable chords across towns and valleys. A tuning diagram from the period shows a curve of metal, annotated with numbers and small shaded zones. It looks less like a religious object than an acoustic circuit. On an overcast morning in 1895, a factory bell rings over an industrial town in Britain, in France, in Central Europe. Photographs from the period show smokestacks, brick facades, and mounted on roofs or in small towers, bells not easily distinguishable from those on churches. Foundry histories note that by the 19th century, bell makers were supplying not only parishes, but also railways, town halls, and factories. The artifact here is the industrial bell, a mid-sized bronze, often with simpler inscription, connected to a mechanical striker or rope. Its sound marks shift changes, lunch breaks, emergencies. In rail depots, coded patterns of strikes regulate train movements. At shipyards, bells signal launches and hazards. On ships themselves, bell codes structure watches and alarms. Official documentation is clear. Company regulations detail when bells are to be rung. Railway manuals standardise the meaning of certain strike patterns. Nothing suggests hidden purpose. Bells are described as practical tools, cheaper than sophisticated whistles, more reliable than early sirens. Human voices filter through factory reports and memoirs, where workers record living by the bell, waking, working, and resting to its rhythm. The emotional tone is mixed. Some describe comfort, others control. The sound is repetitive and metallic, high compared to cathedral bourdons, but still strong enough to slice through machinery, noise, and fog. No archival contradiction is needed here. the dates of installation, the contracts with foundries, the later replacement of bells by sirens all line up. The mystery arises not from a missing records, but from pattern. The same acoustic technology, produced by the same families of founders, rings over altars, assembly lines, and train yards, often within the same decade. A map of Europe around 1900 could be layered with small bell icons where foundries, churches, factories, and stations all commission bronze. The contour of the sound network is invisible, but once seen, difficult to forget. A coordinated lattice of tuned metal, structure in daily life with vibrations rather than wires. In 1869, at a rocky headland on the North Atlantic coast, a bell swings by itself in thick fog. Lighthouse records from the mid to late 19th century describe the use of bells as fog signals, suspended near towers, struck by hand or by mechanical devices, their sound intended to warn ships when light alone could not. The artifact is the fog bell, heavy, rugged, often with a profile not unlike a church bell, but installed on coastal frames or vessels. Early systems required keepers to ring by hand. Soon, inventors developed mechanical strikers and perpetual bells that use clockwork or wave motion to automate ringing. One 19th century device installed on a main lighthouse used machinery to strike the bell at fixed intervals without human effort. The official explanation is straightforward. Bells were familiar, relatively cheap, and their low tones travelled well in fog, where higher pitches were absorbed more quickly by humid air. Manuals from lighthouse authorities specified distances at which a bell of given size should be heard in specific weather conditions, treating sound as a quantifiable safety tool. Human traces appear in logbooks, where keepers noted nights of dense fog and the strain of long shifts at the bell before automation. Some recalled hearing their own bells echo off unseen cliffs, creating ghost signals that confused early navigators. The motif here is the muted strike and the rolling, dampened echo over water. Archival tension surfaces not in lost documents, but in classification. In maritime records, fog bells are usually listed under signals or safety apparatus. In foundry records, bells of almost identical profile are categorized as church or civic commissions. Very rarely are the two functions linked in a single catalogue. The same engineering is split into separate bureaucratic identities. Taken together, these tuned bronze resonators, placed at high points and edges, church towers inland, lighthouse frames at coast, form a continuous acoustic perimeter. Official history calls one side sacred and the other practical. The sound itself does not care. Thick, cold fog settles over the headland. The bell strikes again, its notes swallowed, and then slowly returned by the sea. In a workshop in London in the early 20th century, a large medieval bell lies sideways on a vertical lathe. A black and white photograph, reproduced in modern studies of bell tuning, shows curls of bronze shaving away from the tool as the bell rotates. The caption, added decades later, explains, "Retuning for improved harmony." The artifact here is not a new bell, but an old one being altered. Reports from tuners at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in the late 20th century mention that as much as half their work involved retuning existing bells, many of them centuries old, to bring their partials into line with modern harmonic standards. Officially, this is restoration. Modern acoustic theory allows founders to correct earlier imperfections, removing dissonant partials, smoothing chords, and making historic rings more pleasant to contemporary ears. The process is documented in technical papers, where to remove metal to sharpen or flatten each partial, How much can be safely shaved from specific zones? Human reaction appears in parish records and local histories, where some communities celebrate their improved bells, while others quietly note regret at lost familiar tones. The sound motif is delicate before and after recordings, where the original strike carries a rough, complex shimmer, and the retuned bell sounds smoother, more aligned to Western harmonic expectations. There is no explicit archival contradiction. The work is authorized, the techniques published. The tension lies in what is unmeasured. Whatever tuning system or acoustic intention guided the original founders is largely unrecorded. Modern research into strike notes of historic peals suggests that earlier founders already exercised subtle control over pitch, even if they lacked formal theory. Those interested in deeper patterns see in the retuning a quiet erasure, not just of sound, but of a different way of organizing resonance, perhaps one more tied to physical sensation, to building specific acoustics, or to relationships between bells and surrounding structures. Metal dust settles on the workshop floor, fine as sand. A hum lingers in the air. The last vibration of the old bell, shaved away into a new voice that fits the prevailing scale. By 1915, as the First World War grinds through Europe, bells are no longer just tools of faith, timekeeping, or navigation. They are metal. In territories under German and Austro-Hungarian control, church bells are systematically requisitioned, documented, and melted down for armaments. Surveys from the period describe bells taken from churches across Central and Eastern Europe, tagged, photographed, and stacked in open-air depots near railway lines. The artifact here is not a single bell, but a mass of them. Photographic evidence shows piles of bells at sites where confiscated bronze was stored, parish bells, monastery bells, village bells, their individual histories crushed into tonnage. Some committees attempted to save culturally significant examples. Many others vanished into furnaces. Official narratives frame this as necessary sacrifice. Bell bronze, a copper tin alloy, is valuable for shell casings and other military hardware. Wartime propaganda urged citizens to donate metal. Committees were formed to decide which bells must be surrendered and which could remain. Human traces surface in notes and correspondence recorded by later historians. Priests painting the names of their parishes on confiscated bells in hopes of recovering them. Local communities tracking trains as they carried away the voices of their towns. In some cases, surveys were later organized to locate bells removed by retreating armies and stored far away, their origins half forgotten. The archival tension is chronological. Bells that had stood since the 17th or 18th centuries disappear between 1915 and 1918. New bells, cast in the 1920s and 1930s, carry inscriptions that speak of replacement, memory, and loss, but the soundscape they recreate is never quite the same. For those sensitive to patterns, the removal of so many tuned resonators within a few years feels less like incidental collateral damage and more like a resetting of the continent's vibrational field. By 1917, a tower stands empty, its openings boarded, its bell frame bare. Snow falls against the stone. The only sound is wind, where, for generations, bronze had spoken. In 1891, the Paccard foundry near Annecy casts what will become the largest bell in France, weighing around 18.8 tons, the Savoyard, destined for the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre in Paris. The bell is hoisted into the new basilica's tower and first rung in the early 20th century, its deep note designed to roll over the city. The artifact is both object and site, The bell's low fundamental frequency, combined with its elevated position, produces a sound that can be heard across much of northern Paris under favourable conditions. Its profile reflects the advances of 19th century bell tuning. Its placement on a hilltop crowned by domes completes an acoustic system, dense bronze, enclosed stone, open air. Official explanations emphasize symbolism, national repentance after the Franco-Prussian War, the basilica as a spiritual beacon over the capital. Technical descriptions focus on the bell's size, weight, and casting challenges. Few accounts dwell on propagation, the way its low-frequency energy interacts with the city's topography, slipping between streets and over rooftops as a slowly decaying wave. Human reactions recorded in guidebooks and travel accounts describe the bell sound as like distant thunder or a great heartbeat over the city. The sound motif is the long, slow decay, one strike, then a vibrating presence that seems to outlast the individual note. There is no documented archival contradiction here. Dates, dimensions, and inscriptions align. The ambiguity lies in function. On paper, the Savoyard calls to prayer, marks feasts, and commemorates events. In practice, it also demonstrates how a single, carefully tuned resonator, placed at a strategic elevation, can shape the sonic identity of an entire urban basin. Those drawn to deeper patterns see in Sacré-Cœur's hilltop domes an enormous bell, an echo of older configurations, high places crowned with resonant chambers, metal and stone designed to vibrate together, projecting influence through sound rather than light. On an evening in 1925, mist settles soft over Paris. The bell rings once. Its low tone moves outwards, invisible but measurable, a reminder that architecture can act as a giant, tuned loudspeaker. While European foundries refine true harmonic tuning and build ever larger carillons, other traditions maintain different yet equally sophisticated engagements with resonant metal. In Kyoto or Nara in the late 19th century, temple bells, bonsho, are already centuries old. Cast in bronze, often several meters high, they are struck from the outside with a horizontal beam. Their low, lingering tones mark time, rituals, and, on certain nights, transitions between years. These bells predate modern acoustic theory, but empirical understanding of resonance is evident in their design. Thick walls, specific shapes, and careful placement within temple precincts, sometimes near water or flanked by wooden galleries that subtly modulate sound. Travellers' accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries describe feeling the vibration in their bodies and in the wooden floors beneath their feet, not just hearing it. The archive here is rich in continuity and poor in formulas. Temple records list dates of casting and recasting. Inscriptions describe donors, deities, and wishes. There is little explicit discussion of overtones, yet the bell strikes produce complex spectra that modern recordings reveal as dense clusters of partials, evolving slowly over tens of seconds. There are no clear contradictions in these sources. The bells are where records say they are, their dates and dedications consistent. The tension arises when we compare them to Western developments. While European founders moved towards standardized harmonic tuning, many Asian traditions preserve sonic profiles that prioritize duration, depth, and a kind of enveloping presence over conventional consonants. Those interested in global patterns see here a shared logic. Large bronze resonators, placed in carefully chosen architectural settings, used to mark not only time, but transitions in awareness, sonic structures binding communities to cycles larger than the clock. The shared principle is resonance. The specific scales differ. On a winter night around 1900, air grows cold enough that each strike's breath can be seen. The bell's note swells, hangs, and seems to vibrate against the sky. In that long decay, separated by oceans and cultures from European belfries, a common technology is audible, the shaping of space through tuned metal. By the early 1900s, as maritime traffic increases and industrial noise grows, engineers seek louder, more reliable fog signals. At a site like Split Rock Lighthouse on Lake Superior, completed in 1910, the chosen device is a diaphone, a powerful foghorn originally invented as an organ stop, using a vibrating airstream to produce a low-frequency tone, audible miles away. The artifact here shifts from bells to related acoustic machinery. The diaphone is not a bell, but its story reveals a continuity, musical technology adapted to environmental signalling. The same understanding of air columns, resonance, and low-frequency propagation that shaped grand organs in churches is redirected toward navigation and safety. Official accounts present this as progress. Bells, which had served as fog signals in earlier decades, are deemed too quiet or labour-intensive. Horns and sirens, driven by compressed air or engines, can sound at fixed intervals with minimal human effort. Technical manuals for lighthouse keepers explain maintenance, timing, and effective range, treating sound as an engineered field. Human voices emerge in logs, keepers noting how the fog signal's tone can be felt in the body, rattling windows and dishes. Local residents complained of sleepless nights during long fogs. The sound motif is the cyclical blast, a deep, almost mechanical moan, punctuating otherwise silent, low-visibility landscapes. There is no recorded contradiction between the religious and technical domains. Organ builders and fog signal engineers operate in overlapping yet distinct spheres. The pattern appears only when we pull back. Knowledge honed in sacred spaces, shaping harmonics, controlling wind and resonance, is repurposed to manage ships and coastlines. Placed in a larger continuum, bells, organs, and horns all appear as successive iterations of one idea, controlling large volumes of air with tuned vibrations, turning sound into infrastructure. On a foggy dawn in 1915, the diaphone sounds at regular intervals. Far offshore, a ship adjusts course by ear alone. Bells are no longer the only technology of sound, but they remain the template from which newer devices evolve. By the late 19th century, bells are no longer confined to towers and roofs. Electric bells and buzzers, powered by batteries and controlled by wall-mounted switches or pull cords, spread through houses, hotels, hospitals, and factories. While individual patents specify mechanisms and circuits, the overall effect is consistent. A light touch in one room produces a mechanical chime in another. The artifact is the electric bell, a small metal cup or gong struck by an armature that vibrates rapidly when current flows. Early telephone systems integrate bells as ringers. Hotel annunciators combine visual indicators with chimes. These devices hide in panels, corridors, and servant passages, their wiring threaded through walls and ceilings. Official literature, catalogues, trade manuals, advertisements presents them as conveniences, instruments of service and efficiency. They summon staff, signal calls, and mark simple alarms. The tone is practical, even mundane. Human traces persist in the architecture of older buildings, where disconnected pull cords and dead annunciator boards remain. In some historic houses, restoration logs mention finding old bell wiring behind plaster, once part of a domestic communication network now obsolete. The sound motif is the sharp metallic trill of a small bell, heard through a wall, followed by footsteps in a distant corridor. No archival contradiction is needed. Dates of installation and use line up with the spread of electricity and telephony. The ambiguity lies in perception. The same principle that synchronizes factories and worn ships now structures daily life inside private spaces, turning houses into small acoustic networks. Those who search for deeper continuity see in this proliferation a final miniaturized phase of an older pattern. Signals sent not by shouted word or line of sight, but by resonance, mechanical, electrical, or both, connecting rooms, towers, and distant coasts through controlled vibration. In a dim corridor around 1905, light filters through high windows. A bell rings once behind a panel, its precise location unclear. Somewhere else in the house, a door opens in response. The system works, invisible and almost forgotten. Between 1939 and 1945, as the Second World War reshapes Europe, the earlier pattern of bell requisition returns at a greater scale. Research into wartime records estimates that regimes confiscated vast numbers of church bells from Germany and occupied countries, many of them melted down for armaments. Photographs from 1942 to 1944 show bells stacked in open yards, labelled and awaiting transport to foundries. Contemporary reports and later analyses describe how only a fraction of historically significant bells were spared. Many others, some centuries old, disappeared into industrial process with minimal documentation. Official narratives again emphasized necessity, strategic materials for war. Yet the cultural dimension is unmistakable. Removing bells strips towns not only of metal, but of sonic identity. Populations experience the loss as a muting of communal voices. Human traces appear in local histories that record exceptional cases. Churches where bells survived because they were made of steel rather than bronze, making them unsuitable for melting, or where their removal proved logistically difficult. In some towns, steel bells from the early 20th century remain today as rare pre-war survivors. The archival contradiction emerges later. In some regions, inventories of confiscated bells exist. In others, records are fragmentary or lost. Post-war efforts to track surviving bells stored in depots result in partial restitutions, but many communities receive replacements rather than originals. For those attuned to patterns, the 20th century's bell destruction looks like a forced reboot of Europe's acoustic field, a violent thinning of a dense, centuries-old network of resonant metal. In recent years, ceremonies have been held where new bells cast from fragments of weapons are installed in church towers, explicitly commemorating bells lost to earlier wars. The sound returns, but now layered with memory, a resonance built from melted steel and bronze, carrying the echo of absence as much as presence. In the decades after both world wars, Europe's soundscape is patched together from ruins and journeys. Some towers remain empty for years. Others receive new bells, cast in the 1920s, 1950s, or later, their inscriptions commemorating loss and rebuilding. In various cities, bells originally cast for distant cathedrals arrive as war reparations or redirected restitutions, creating layered histories in a single belfry. The artifact here is a composite, a tower with bells of different ages and origins. One may date to the 17th century, another to the 1730s, others to interwar or post-war decades. Some are local, others travelled across borders, their previous homes recorded only in scholarly articles and specialist catalogues. Official church and municipal records track these changes with varying precision. Inventories list new bells, sometimes acknowledging the absence of predecessors melted for war. Restoration reports describe installing steel or bronze replacements, occasionally noting acoustic differences between old and new. Human voices surface in local newspapers and parish newsletters. Reports of first ringings, community gatherings under newly restored sound. Emotional tones range from relief to a quiet sense that something is still missing, that the new bells, however well cast, do not quite reproduce the remembered resonance. The archival tension lies in attribution. Bells that once belonged to one region now ring in another. Some communities unknowingly host bells that originated hundreds of kilometers away. Scholars reconstruct these paths through inscriptions and stylistic analysis, but for most listeners, the bell simply belongs to the tower they see. Those sensitive to patterns find in these migrations a ghostly continuation of the earlier network. Resonant nodes uprooted and replanted, their low frequencies now tying together places that share no direct political history but are linked by bronze. At dusk in 1969, a newly reconstructed church receives fresh bells from a modern foundry. Their sound is clear, bright, and carefully tuned. In the background of archival footage, rubble is still visible. The city's acoustic memory has been edited but not entirely erased. By 2017, the historic Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London closes its doors after nearly 450 years of operation. Its premises, once a coaching inn dating to the 17th century, are sold. The last bell cast at the site is given to a museum, along with templates, tools, and other artifacts of the craft. A few years later, campaigns emerged to revive the foundry's work in some form, recognizing its role in a long lineage of sound making. The artifact now is the archive itself. Photographs of bells in the workshop in the 1890s, moulds in storage, handbells gleaming on benches, tuning forks in cases. Exhibits in museums in London, Annecy, and elsewhere present bell founding as heritage, a craft to be documented rather than an infrastructure to be maintained. Official narratives celebrate continuity where possible. Centuries of bell making, preserved techniques, surviving peals. At the same time, they acknowledge decline. Fewer large commissions, more foundries closed than operating. The sonic grid that once covered vast regions with tuned bronze is thinner now, partially replaced by electronic speakers, recorded chimes, and digital notifications. Human traces remain surprisingly dense in the surviving paperwork. Founders' signatures in ledgers, tuning notes in margins, hand-sketch cross-sections of profiles, letters commissioning bells for remote parishes or factories. Each mark documents a decision about how space should sound. There is no archival contradiction in this final moment. The facts of closure and preservation are well established. The unease comes from recognition. When we listen to a city today, to the few remaining bells, to train announcements, to phone alerts and alarms, we hear descendants of the same idea, shaping human attention with timed resonance. What began as molten metal and prayer became timekeeping, navigation, labour control, and private communication. Bells were not secret in themselves. Their hiddenness lay in how their roles overlapped, forming an acoustic architecture that official histories treat as background. In a contemporary city at twilight, a church bell rings in the distance. Closer by, a tram chime sounds, a phone vibrates, an elevator dings. For a brief moment, all these signals overlap, bronze, electric, digital, before fading into silence. In the surviving bells, and in the devices that replace them, a faint continuity remains, a reminder that sound has always been more than noise,